Human Rights Watch reported that Mauritanian security forces committed serious abuses against West and Central African migrants and asylum seekers between 2020 and early 2025, including torture, arbitrary detention, inhuman conditions, and mass expulsions, often supported by EU and Spanish migration control funding. Despite these violations, the EU and Spain continued to outsource migration management to Mauritania, with Spanish forces at times present during abusive operations and the EU financing detention facilities. Mauritania has recently taken steps such as banning collective expulsions and adopting new migrant protection procedures, but Human Rights Watch stressed that both Mauritania and the European partners must prioritize rights and save lives over security crackdowns. Malawi faces a pivotal test as it heads into the September 16, 2025 elections amid concerns over voters' apathy, political violence, biased media, and an electoral commission perceived as captured by the ruling party. Reports of police inaction during violent attacks on protesters and the exclusion of civil society from monitoring voters' rolls have further eroded public trust in the process. Unless urgent reforms, respect for rights, and adherence to regional and international electoral standards are ensured, Malawi risks sliding into democratic decay and contested legitimacy. India BJP-led government has intensified its crackdown on dissent by banning books, raiding media outlets, and prosecuting journalists, analysts, and critics under vague and colonial-era laws, despite the Supreme Court suspending sedition provisions due to misuse. Journalists, artists, activists, and students have been particularly targeted, while religious minorities, especially Muslims, face disproportionate arrests for online expression. This escalating suppression of free expression undermines democratic accountability, and rights groups urge the government to protect fundamental freedoms rather than curtail them. Amnesty International reported the Syrian asylum seeker Ahmed Abo, who has lived in Turkey since 2012, has had his temporary protection status revoked in 2023 after being diagnosed with HIV and labeled a security risk. However, on the 26th of August 2025, the Istanbul Migration Management Directorate restored his protection status and reactivated his social security, granting him renewed access to free healthcare. This decision ends a 2-year ordeal marked by discrimination and denial of essential rights. Prominent Vietnamese land rights activist, I'm not sure if I pronounced that well, but Chan Chi-Jai, imprisoned since 2020 alongside her 2 sons, is facing serious health problems after years of detention under harsh and allegedly abusive conditions. Joy became a leading figure in the land rights movement after her family's farmland was seized without compensation, organizing protests and documenting forced evictions, but she was sentenced to 8 years in prison under Article 117 of the Criminal Code for peacefully advocating against such abuses. Amnesty International has raised grave concerns that her life is at risk without urgent healthcare, stressing that she is a prisoner of conscience, detained solely for exercising her human rights, and must be immediately released. According to the New Humanitarian, Nigerian authorities arrested 6 Sudanese refugees on the 21st of August 2025 during a police raid on the Agadez Humanitarian Center, where residents have been staging daily protests for nearly a year over dire living conditions and a lack of resettlement opportunities. Refugees and UN experts said that 6 detainees were targeted for their leadership roles in the peaceful demonstrations, raising concerns over enforced disappearance and human rights violations. Despite the arrest and earlier revocation of some protesters' refugee status, demonstrations in the camp, home to nearly 1,900 people, continue amid worsening shortages of food, medical care, and freedom of movement. Also, according to the New Humanitarian, the Arakan Army, AA, in Myanmar has been accused of detaining Rohingya civilians in forced labor camps where men, women, and even children were subjected to beatings and compelled to carry out hard labor such as road building, cleaning, and cooking under abusive conditions. Witnesses described the camps as prisons where detainees faced violence, denial of basic necessities, and were ultimately forced to choose between years of imprisonment in Myanmar or expulsion to overcrowded refugee camps in Bangladesh. Rights groups warn that these abuses highlight the AA's worsening persecution of Rohingya Muslims, perpetuating the cycle of displacement and violence even as the group expands control across Rakhine State. The UN warned the Security Council that Gaza faces famine and mass civilian suffering for nearly 2 years of war, while escalating violence, demolitions, and settlement expansion in the West Bank further erode prospects for peace. UN officials stressed that Gaza's famine is a created catastrophe of conflict and blockades, with over 500,000 of people already starving and tens of thousands of children at risk of dying from acute malnutrition, calling for an immediate ceasefire, the release of hostages, and renewed commitment to a two-state solution, the UN urged bold collective action to end the occupation and prevent further humanitarian collapse. From the 24th to the 25th of August 2025, the International Commission of Jurists, ICJ, the Center for Independent Journalism, CIJ, and the Newman Fund convened a workshop in Kuala Lumpur with human rights defenders and Asian experts to push for a rights-based approach to counter harmful online content. Participants warned that Southeast Asian governments often respond to disinformation and hate speech with vague, repressive laws and state-backed disinformation, while tech platforms fuel abuses through profit-driven algorithm and weak moderation. The meeting produced recommendations for Asian states, AICHR, and tech companies to strengthen human rights safeguards, ensure civil society participation and improve platform accountability, and embed human rights protections into digital governance. On the 1st of October 2025, elections will be held for 5 seats on the UN Committee Against Torture, CIT, with 10 candidates, 6 men and 4 women, nominated by states parties in the UN Convention Against Torture. To promote transparency, diversity, and equal opportunity, several NGOs, including Amnesty International, APT, ISHR, and Redress, are hosting a virtual dialogue where candidates will present their background and visions, followed by Q&A with state parties. The CIT plays a key role in guiding states on implementing the convention, and candidates are expected to demonstrate independence, high moral standing, and recognize human rights expertise to ensure the body's legitimacy and effectiveness. A new UN Human Rights Council resolution explicitly links anti-corruption with human rights, providing states with practical guidelines to address how corruption undermines rights such as access to healthcare, education, and a healthy environment. Civil society, led by the UNCAC coalition and supported by hundreds of organizations, played a pivotal role in shaping the resolution, which emphasizes protection of activists, journalists, and whistleblowers from reprisal. The resolution marks a turning point by moving from abstract recognition to actionable measures, with upcoming UNCAC negotiations in December offering a critical opportunity to strengthen transparency, accountability, and civil society participation in global anti-corruption efforts. In the International Day of the Disappeared, the ICRC reports that over 80,000 people are registered as missing across Africa, with the conflict in Sudan driving a sharp rise in cases. Over 7,700 new requests in 2024 alone, a 52% increase from the previous year. Neighboring countries like Chad and South Sudan have seen a dramatic surge in missing persons linked to the influx of Sudanese refugees, with caseloads rising by 275% and 70% respectively. Marked by the International Day of the Disappeared, the ICRC urged greater international visibility and action to prevent disappearance, reunite families, and address the emotional toll on loved ones. The IOM UN Migration has scaled up its response after Typhoon Kajiki struck Vietnam, killing at least 7 people, injuring 47, displacing thousands, and damaging over 30,000 homes across several provinces. As co-lead of the emergency shelter and non-food items sector, the IOM is working with Vietnamese authorities to deliver urgent relief such as shelter, cash assistance, and essential supplies, while also ensuring accountability through monitoring and hotlines. Building on lessons from Typhoon Yagi in 2024, the IOM is also focusing on long-term recovery by supporting resilient housing reconstruction, expanding evacuation centers, and enhancing disaster preparedness in one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change. The IOM UN Migration reaffirmed its commitment to supporting Syria during a high-level visit to Damascus, focusing on humanitarian needs, long-term recovery, and national priorities. Discussions with senior Syrian officials centered on the cooperation in border management, assistance for returnees, diaspora engagement, and expanding humanitarian cooperations following IOM's recent approval to reestablish its presence in Damascus. The IOM highlighted its ongoing work in Syria, including displacement tracking, protection services, mental health support, and shelter assistance, while pledging to strengthen its partnership with the government and UN country team. Finally, the IOM UN Migration welcomes Iraq's launch of its first ever national plan to promote safe, orderly, and regular migration 2025-2030, a 5-year strategy aimed at turning migration into a driver of dignity, stability, and development. The plan addresses Iraq's role as both a country of origin and destination, creating pathways for work, education, and family reunification, while also improving governance and institutional accountability. Developed with IOM and Dutch support, The initiative aligns with the Global Compact for Migration and positions Iraq as a regional leader ahead of the 2026 International Migration Review Forum. The Australian Human Rights Commission reported that Race Discrimination Commissioner Giridharan Sivaraman has warned that anti-immigration rhetoric fueled by misreporting and dehumanizing language distracts from the real causes of inequality such as housing stress and job insecurity. He stressed that migration enriches Australia's economy and communities, but racist narratives risk fueling fear and undermining social cohesion. The Commissioner urged the government to adopt the National Anti-Racist Framework, which outlines 63 recommendations for tackling systemic racism while affirming the importance of peaceful but non-vilifying public debate and protest. The Chinese Human Rights Defender, CHRD, together with 72 other human rights organizations, has urged UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer to take urgent action to secure the release of British publisher Jimmy Lai, who has spent over 1,680 days in detention in Hong Kong. The 77-year-old, a prominent pro-democracy figure, is facing a politically motivated trial that has been repeatedly delayed, while his health has severely deteriorated in solitary confinement without adequate medical care. The coalition warned that Lai's life is at grave risk and called on the UK to demand his immediate humanitarian release so he can reunite with his family and receive proper treatment.